Hey, what's up YouTube? I'm back to talk about the Princess Mononoke remake scene that I made a month ago. Some of you probably seen it on Twitter and that one just blew up crazy. For today, I will do a breakdown of it and deliver everything about the process. So let's go back from this video on my channel. This was my first step, to learn and study how to paint backgrounds in the style of Ghibli. Sadly, I won't use Blender for painting, but instead I will use Photoshop. You can also use whatever painting software you feel more comfortable with, like Clip Studio Paint, Krita, Pen Tool Size, even Procreate, and so on. The goal is to be able to paint separately the elements of the background on different layers. Because you are going to do a parallax effect, and to make it, everything has to be exported by layers, in order to rebuild that same background inside Blender with image planes. I won't teach you painting for this session, this is still something that I'm currently working on, and to be honest, creating landscapes is one of my weaknesses. For the time being, I don't want to be overconfident and pretend that I can teach you painting easily. But like you know, practice is the key of progression for sure. The end result is truly far from the aesthetic of the original masterpiece. It could be better, but as a rookie, I'm kinda satisfied. This background is composed of an overall landscape, a first mountain, a second mountain, and a third mountain. Then a first layer of clouds, followed by a second layer of clouds. For the grass, I painted it on a different canvas, which is a larger piece of the scene. Since this one is moving along the animation, I had to vary the elements to give it a more natural look. Finally, I exported each layer independently in PNG because this format has the property to conserve transparency. Moving now into Blender. On a new grease pencil scene, I start by sketching Yakuru and Ashitaka. No rush needed here. The most important thing is to get the first frame done. I genuinely prefer to show you a bit of my drawing skill right here to avoid any tracing controversy. Indeed, tracing is a topic that I had to deal a lot since I started posting my contents. From my own perspective, I mainly use it as a study purposes and also as an improvement tool. Anyway, sketch is done, I can proceed onto the line art. Very simple task to do, but since this is an animation, it's a process to repeat over and over for the amount of frames required. Here how the complete line art animation looks. Not too bad so far, few frames seems to be a little bit off, and this is the perfect timing to do some corrections. In my case, correction really depends on my own vision and how good I can improve the animation. At this stage, I often rely to the edit and sculpt mode for slight modifications, and at the last resort, the drawing mode for a specific design correction. Next step, the coloring. Probably the most tedious task to do in animation, but also the one which makes the overall looks awesome. In terms of coloring, nothing more efficient than the fill tool. The simple way is to fill by spaces. Very precise technique, but at a slow pace. The multi-fill tool can enhance the process by filling multiple frames at once. A complex tool to use depending on how the drawings overlaps to each others. If the drawings are too spread out, this tool won't be effective. This is an ideal option to save extra time and work faster. The stroke extension is a great tip that I recommend to activate that will avoid you to be slowed by some unclosed gaps, because sometimes the fill tool refuses to operate due to it. Certainly the most annoying thing that could happen when you can't locate properly those gaps. Coloring is quite a repetitive process in animation, but trust me, the effort worth. Now the final part, with the backgrounds and the parallax effect. In object mode, I press Shift A to add an image background. Locate and import the full painting of my background. I place it a bit far from the camera and scale it up to fit in the frame. So it creates some space and depth to place all the 2D elements in a 3D space. Then I press Shift A again to add this time images as planes. And one by one I bring the PNG elements in the scene and space them according to the perspective of the landscape. Notice that I also tweak the shadow settings. I mainly turn them off and change the blend mode to alpha clip. Placement is really up to you. In this project, I set up the elements like I wanted, but you're totally free to space them differently. However, watch out of the auto keying. Make sure to turn it off before spacing your elements. Otherwise, you might accidentally create lots of keyframes. At this point, our scene is potentially ready to be animated, but there is a technical problem and it concerns the grease pencil animation done earlier. The problem is that image planes are not considered as 3D objects, and from a rendering standpoint, 2D can't be displayed in front 3D. This is why the grease pencil object always remain in the front, whatever the case. To solve that issue, I had to render separately the grease pencil animation in PNG sequence, then replace it as image planes. Then in the shader, I triggered the settings in that way for running the sequence in loop. Visually speaking, the scene remained the same, but now with an accurate render. Finally, the last step is to animate the background and manage the parallax effect of the scene. I'm animating each piece one by one, and for that I'm pulling out the action editor panel for the keyframing. Remember, the play speed is related to your keyframe spacing and the motion given to the animation. A short motion with a large keyframe spacing will be played slower. At the opposite, a long motion with a small keyframe spacing will be played faster. For the grass, it's a fast motion because the entire piece has to travel to point A to B in a short amount of frames. All of the elements are moving slowly, which means with a slight travel motion from A to B. It's pretty simple. I select the object and set it to position A. Then by pressing I in the viewport, I set the keyframe on location rotation scale. Few frames forward, I move that same object and keyframe this time the position B. So feel free to do as many tweaks as needed till you're satisfied. My last tip is to interpolate both keyframes A and B into line art in order to keep a constant speed all along the animation. And that's pretty much all I can tell you about this project. I'll also be working on an alternate version of it, which is a mix of 3D and 2D. The result seems promising, and I do believe hybrid animation makes a perfect combination. I'm aware that some of you expected a step-by-step tutorial, and I'm sincerely sorry for it. I know reproducing an art piece is a big help in the learning process, but however, I hope it will give ideas and inspiration in your creative journey. Do not worry, I will still being around for listening about your recommendations. Thank you so much for the continuous support given on this channel. I really do appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. Cheers.